Hello and welcome back to the Single Malt Frontier, where we explore the edge of innovation in American single malt whiskey. Here on the show, we do a little bit of tasting and a lot of talking. Usually we talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations we get to have along the way, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. As always, I am your host, Doug, or as I'm known around the internet, Demi Tastes. I'm joined today by my co-host, Phil of the Ranger's Respite, and our special guest today is Murphy Quint, Master Distiller of Cedar Ridge, back on the show after a year and a half to give us an update on how things have been going. Murph's previous appearance on this podcast was episode 7, which I'll put a link to in the description. That interview was one of the best interviews on this podcast in terms of the words and just staying true to that. Usually we talk about whiskey, but we get to talking about a little bit of everything. Had so much fun with that episode, but it was also the first thing we recorded in the new year. And I was at a relative's house. Phil was unavailable. I had my worst webcam, my worst microphone. It was technically the worst podcast episode that we ever did. But in terms of the conversation, it was one of the best ones. So I'm hoping that we get to bring the best of everything today and really let Murph shine as he does on this podcast at its best. So Murph, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you again.
Hey,
yeah, it's really good to have you back. It's always good when people agree to come back on the show because I feel like that says we're doing something right. And I also, since the last time we talked on this podcast, I've met you in person twice at ACSA 2024 in Denver and 2025 in Tucson. I've seen your whiskeys win awards in person. I've got to see your reaction to winning those awards, and I've gotten to see the public's reaction to your whiskeys. And I have a fun story to share about that a bit later today. But first, I guess let me just do the standard and turn this over to you briefly to tell us a bit about yourself and what you do, keeping in mind we've had you on before. People can go listen to that conversation. But just sort of tell us what you've been up to in the last year and a half as Master Distiller. So last time you were on the show, it was your first time introducing yourself as Master Distiller. Right. So tell us how that's been going.
Yeah. So Murphy Quint, Master Distiller blender at Cedar Ridge in Swisher, Iowa. Yeah, that was awesome. That was the first official interview since that title change, if you will. And things have been going really well. It's been a really crazy last year and a half. We've been doing a lot specifically in the category of American single malt. Obviously, since then, we now have an official category of American single malt, which is really fun to operate within that space. But a lot has changed, but also a lot has stayed the same. I'm very, very proud to say that I have the exact same team right now as we had last time we talked. And that's one of the most important things that a master distiller, master blender has, is the team of people that work together as a collective to put out these great products. So same team, same business, same company, all that. But the market is definitely changing. And it's been really interesting to put out new products in a new category in a market that is kind of shifting into an area that a lot of people consider to be a negative. There's a little bit of a whiskey downturn happening, but yet we're very proud to say that we're continuing to grow and head in a positive direction. So very interesting times. And really, really glad to be back on this with you guys, revisiting this stuff.
So in our pre-show talk, we were sort of talking a little bit about, so obviously Cedar Ridge, as we know from last time, makes more than just single malt. In fact, it makes more than just whiskey. So in addition to owning your own market in bourbon, which is fantastic, and being one of the leading American single malts, I think it's safe for me to say without too much bias, you also make wine, I believe a certain amount of brandy, and also some fortified wines like port. There's a vast portfolio, Cedar Ridge being sort of a winery and a state, not just whiskey and spirits. Could you talk to us a bit about sort of the portfolio breakdown these days?
And it's interesting. I was having this conversation just a few hours ago with someone else. Cedar Ridge, we do so many things here that it is almost really difficult to describe what Cedar Ridge is and how it all works. But one thing that we've gotten really good at, specifically over the last couple of years, in part due to our team of directors just kind of figuring this out, is figuring out how to kind of bridge all those different things that we do, bridge them together, connect them, and kind of move forward as one rather than a bunch of different divisions of the company, which is kind of where we came from. But to dive into that a little bit, yeah, I mean, we are a winery distillery combination. We really started out as a wine focused company and evolved to one that is more of a distillery focused company that is influenced by our wine background. We still to this day make some really, really great wines. And I'm always very quick to say that I am not a winemaker. It's not a language that I speak particularly well, to be honest. I'm much more on the whiskey side. But our winemaker, Kent Falker, who's also a vineyard manager, and his assistant, Mike Keeney, they work really well together. Some of the best things that they put out are a Ruby Port, a Madeira-inspired wine called V, Roman numeral 5. Some of these like fortified wines that kind of cross over into the spirits world. That's really the space that Cedar Ridge plays in right now. And the cool thing about that is those casks, when we're done using them for wine, we can use them to finish things like primarily single malt, but also at times even bourbon. So yeah, we do a ton out here, but the last thing I'll say, Hannah, is that it all roots entirely from the land. We are in Iowa. We have very ag-focused minds, ag-focused backgrounds. Most people in the state of Iowa have had generations of people here working the land, and we're no different on that front. So whatever we're doing, we're really focused on that element. We have 11 acres of vineyards out here. We have a cornfield just to my right now. And, we're very focused on working off that land. When it comes to, you asked like product breakdown, when it comes to production, about 85% of what we produce is spirits, almost entirely whiskey. We make just once or twice a year, we'll make brandy, rum, a little bit of vodka. Most of that remaining 20 to 15% is going to be the wine that we produce in-house, and that's just sold in the state of Iowa. So very different kind of setups. Our spirits are sold in 35 states. We export to 5 countries. Our wine is just available in the state of Iowa, but the two work really well together hand in hand to kind of inspire each other and to pull each other in certain directions, the winery and the distillery.
So that's fascinating. I don't want to get necessarily too deep into it because you make a little bit of everything. So it makes sense that you've got a little bit of vodka. But I think of vodka as, for most distilleries, and obviously this is not true of all distilleries. Like for example, Clear Creek makes a fantastic vodka that is a staple in their portfolio. But for most distilleries, I think of vodka as a thing you do to keep the lights on, right? It's an unaged spirit that you can make with the materials you already have at hand. And if you're going to make it, I would think you'd be making enough to sell regularly. So the fact that you make a vodka, but you say only sparingly, is really interesting. Could you explain a little bit more?
Yeah. And first of all, while I think that other distilleries, you mentioned Clear Creek, and I completely agree with you. I'm a huge Clear Creek fan. They make an awesome vodka. We're really not focused on building a vodka to sell, large scale, to distribute or anything like that. The main reason why we produce a vodka is because originally, if we wanted to pour cocktails at our tasting room, we legally could only do that if we made the product. So it really rooted from that. The laws have just kind of changed on that front. So now if we wanted to, we could bring someone else's vodka in, but we've already kind of got it. We've got our system set up around it, so we can produce it. It's really no extra hassle. And so we do so. We just sell a little bit in the state of Iowa and in our tasting room. So it's not like, we have this grand vision for vodka and we're trying to grow it or anything. It's just something that we want to offer. And, you got to keep in mind, we're a distillery, but we're also a business. And we happen to be a business in the spirit sector that is currently trending down. And so as a business, like you said, we have to really consider things like, well, we can make it today and sell it tomorrow. There's really no hassle here. Whereas whiskey, you have to be so strategic. We have to produce it today. Well, I think these barrels, we'll pencil those in for 6 years from now. These ones maybe 8. You really have to forecast this stuff out. And when it comes to inventory management and financial management, that's a whole, it's a whole mess to deal with. With vodka, we can produce it today, sell it tomorrow. We don't really have to think about it. It's not really where our heart is. It's not really where our future is. It's just something we'd be silly not to do.
That totally makes sense. I think we actually talked a little bit about this last time. I was in Texas at the time. And in Texas, it's also true. If you want to sell cocktails out of your tasting room, it has to be products you distilled. So that makes sense that's part of, it's hard to say state to state. Everything is so different. But it makes sense that that's something that happens in more than one place. So that definitely makes sense. Just enough vodka to serve the tasting room, which is going to be way less than the amount of single malt you have to make to service the demands of single malt 5 years from now in 35 states. That's a completely different equation.
Very, very different math. No, but just the last thing I'll say, Hannah, is, I mean, we have an event center here. We do a ton of weddings. We get over 100,000 visitors through our tasting room every year. And while what we're trying to push on the people that come in here is the whiskey that we produce and the wine that we produce, we also know that at weddings and things like that, or when, someone brings their cousin out here who brings a friend with them, like they might want a vodka tonic while they're out here. And we don't want that to get in the way of things. We might as well just offer it. We'll have it here. If they want it, they can order it, but we're focused on whiskey and wine.
Totally makes sense. So as long as we're talking about timing and forecasting, which is one of the really interesting things we talked about last time that we probably didn't get as deep into as we could on such a geeky podcast as ours. So you've got the Madeira style and the port style fortified wines, which are in a way a combination of brandy, I assume, some sort of fortifying wine, spirit on top of the wine. I don't know much about wine, but I think most wines take a little bit of aging time. I don't know if it's months, years. And then on top of that, you've got brandy that you have to think about, and then sort of a final product, which may or may not also go into a barrel to finish. What does the forecasting look like on the port and Madeira type products?
It's a little complicated because it does require time, and it's not the same schedule, say as like single malt production or anything like that. One thing that you have to kind of factor in, though, is that eventually you find your sweet spot when it comes to age. And a lot of times that just kind of happens by accident. For instance, I'll just kind of make something up. But like with our Madeira inspired wine, maybe we had it sitting down, and once we released it, it happened to be, say, 7 years. And that went quite well. So then we just kind of created a system around it being 7 years. Stuff like that has a tendency to happen. I'm not exactly saying that's exactly what we did with ours. It's just kind of an example. Stuff like that has a tendency to kind of figure itself out. And then all of a sudden now you're working on a 7-year timeline, right? So it's not necessarily that it needs that amount of time. It's just that's something that you ease into. But yeah, when it comes with the wine, there's all sorts of things to consider. And you mentioned, brandy or high proof grape spirits. We usually fortify with high proof grape spirits, both in our port and in our Madeira inspired wine. And so we have to factor that into our production as well. Every time we do grape harvest, we keep some set aside to actually produce high proof grape spirits that work as our fortifying agent. So yeah, there is a lot to consider there, a lot to track, but we've got a really skilled team. Our winemaker, I can't speak highly enough on that front. He's really good at kind of taking that off my plate and everyone else's plate and just kind of managing that on his own. He's always thinking ahead and getting that stuff done.
Okay, so that's interesting to me that your brandy, your dessert wine, the fortified dessert wines, are made not with brandy but with a grape spirit. So a grape eau de vie unaged, right?
Well, correct. So yeah, brandy, I believe, God, I can't remember if it's 160 or 170 proof. That's the threshold for brandy. We go north of that, making it high proof grape spirits rather than just brandy legally. That's all federal terminology. And so yeah, we have to hit that threshold for it to be high proof grape spirits, and then it works as a really great fortifying agent. It's not going to have the same body and character that you would have in normal brandy, obviously, but that's not what we're after anyway. If we want to produce something that's going to have really good character, we're probably not going to use that as the fortifying agent. We're probably going to bottle that on its own.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, so before we go way in the rabbit hole of talking about brandy, which I would love to do at some point, but in the interest of keeping this content, we're trying very hard, audience, to keep this podcast to a shorter time, less than an hour and a half, and we're doing pretty well so far this quarter. So we'd like to keep that up. And I have Phil. If anybody wonders why Phil sits on the line and mostly doesn't say anything, is because he's my on the line producer, and he keeps the time and he takes the notes, and that's really good. But we like Phil to talk, so Phil, feel free to chime in whenever you want. Okay, so let's get into the whiskey before we go on a huge rabbit hole on brandy. So we have some interesting things today. Last time we talked about the 92 proof Solera Quintessential standard batch release. So I think we'll briefly talk about that just to contextualize the rest of the releases. And Phil has a bottle of that. I unfortunately don't have a bottle of that because my parents loved it so much. I left it with them. And I took 4 ounces of samples for myself so that I could still have it for comparison's sake. So we have the port side we talked about last time, and we're going to talk about that again. We have reasons for that, which will become clear momentarily. We have the Wine Club First Meeting, which is a newer release, and also apropos of the current new releases that are coming out. Last time we also talked about the Tokai Cask Finish, which I think we'll just gloss on by that for now. That is one of my favorite Cedar Ridges of all time, personally. Even having tried this new stuff, but we'll see how it holds up as I taste it a bit more. We have the Untitled Cigar Malt Project, which took bourbon Instagram by storm last year. It was really cool to see people who ordinarily wouldn't pay that much attention to American single malt saying everybody needs to try this release. Everybody needs to try Cedar Ridge. There were some major accounts that were talking about this. That one dude, Ryan, the Blind Pig Basement Pub, 2 Ounce Whiskey, Cinnabourbon, I believe, did one. It was basically like, if you're on whiskey Instagram, anybody you followed was talking about the Untitled Cigar Malt Project, which is really cool to see. And now we have a chance to talk about it too. And finally, we have essentially the reason that Phil and I reached out to Murph a few months ago to say, hey, we should have you back on to do an update. We have the peated malt in an Amontillado sherry cask, which could not be more perfect for Phil and my palates. So we would love to talk at length about this last one, but I think we're going to go roughly in that order that I just said. If that makes sense to you, Murph.
Works to me.
Some of these are peated, some of these are not peated. And I'll just say, as a little bit of a preview, maybe a little bit of a spoiler, I actually get more smokiness out of the cigar malt than I do out of the peated Amontillado cask, personally. So I don't know if we want to like flip the order of those, but I think we should save the Amontillado for last.
Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea.
Okay, cool. So let's start in on the port side.
All right.
So the port side was one of the bottles that we talked about last time with Murph. We talked about it at length, and just briefly in summary, the really cool thing about this bottling is that these aren't estate casks from Cedar Ridge exclusively. They include bodega sherry casks that held and aged real sherry for 40 years plus. So those are fantastic, high quality casks. That's the sort of thing you don't see very often. And normally when you do see it, it sort of means there was bad news somewhere. Like a bodega was closing down or something like that. Sometimes it's just they retired a cask, but if it's a younger cask like that, chances are that means that somebody had to downsize. So there's a little bit of a sad story associated with that, but on the flip side, we get something beautiful out of it. So we sort of have the Phoenix effect happening on a release like this port side. This is fantastic whiskey. Definitely one of my favorite things from Cedar Ridge. Something I have to be in the mood for: intense complexity, which is something that Cedar Ridge does fantastically well, especially in the Quintessential line of products. Why are we talking about this again today? I will let Murphy tell us.
All right. So the Quintessential special releases, we got this black label right here. The one that we're talking about right now is called Portside, and that was the second ever special release that we did. It was, with that being said, even though it was second, it was the first one that really took like whiskey Instagram by storm, if you will. I know that I think it was Urban Bourbonist gave it his whiskey of the year, and it just kind of blew up after that, and that really laid the line for the entire program to succeed after that, which was phenomenal. But the reason why we're talking about this one is that because there are some parallels to the next one that we're getting ready to release, and when I say that, I literally mean within the next couple days here, we're going to be releasing our 5th ever Quintessential special release, which is once again port based. Now the port side, obviously heavy port influence. The whole concept behind the port side was we wanted to show the port side of our single malt program. And our Quintessential single malt program is very secondary cask maturation forward, or cask finish forward, however you want to phrase it. We're always working with different casks. And quick note on that, you brought up the Amontillado sherry. Because we bring in so many different casks from around the world, over time we kind of we kind of find some good leads on authentic casks that we can utilize. And that is something that's happened over time with the Amontillado sherry butts. Is we've got finally a really good connection with a couple bodegas over there who can get us these authentic sherry butts that have held Amontillado sherry for decades and decades before we actually get them. Right now, we have probably 30 to 35 of them on site. Some of them we've had long enough that we're actually beginning to retire them. But anyway, we bring in a lot of these different casks to finish our whiskey, and then we're blending them together to create these fun quintessential special releases. And the one that we're sipping right now is Portside. It was released, let's see, almost 2 years ago now, and I got to go back and I'll read it here. But first fill ruby port. That was the kind of the highlight of the show was these first fill ruby port casks, Amontillado sherry and virgin French oak. So 3 different casks that kind of made up this particular blend, but really heavy port. We wanted that port to shine in the Portside release.
There's something about this time of year, like this sort of, I would say late spring. It's probably like well into summer for some people, but here in the Pacific Northwest, it feels like late spring. It's like 58 degrees outside today. So it's like, it's May, it's mid-May. Are we in summer yet? I don't know. But something about this time of year, late spring, I really love these heavy wine cask finished whiskeys with a lot of complexity. Whereas some times of the year, like in the high summer, I'll have something with this much complexity and I'll kind of bounce off of it. It's like, that's like too much right now. I need something like simpler, something more refreshing. But this time of year, it almost feels like, no, this is perfect.
Yeah.
So I think it just depends. Sometimes I'll pour one of these and I'll be like, I love Cedar Ridge. That is just too much for me right now. So. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I feel like in order to give people a balanced perspective of like what you'll be drinking when you get Cedar Ridge, sometimes, if you're not in the mood for something really intense, this might not necessarily be for you all the time. But for me, definitely, like more often than not, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to be drinking.
And I'm 100% with you on that. So the special release, the black labels, they're almost always going to be pretty big and bold, very complex. And I'm with you. That's not always something that I'm after. When you get into our single cask series, which we'll talk about some of that stuff later, those can really be all over the map. For instance, I think I'm allowed to talk about this, so I will. Just today, we're bottling a single barrel of Chardonnay cask finished, and that's going to be much more on the. It's awesome too. It's much more on the light side. It's very buttery. It's very approachable, not aggressive at all. Whereas these black label special releases, they're always going to be big and bold because that's usually what I'm after. I will say, to kind of play off what you were saying though, I found I really, really like these when there's a little bit more humidity in the air. Like right now, it's hitting the spot for me in particular. Today, it's very humid here. I don't know why it's so humid already. In the winter though, when it's a little bit drier and it's very cold, I'm not usually looking for something that's quite as big, bold, and complex. A lot of times that comes through as very sharp and aggressive to me. But as soon as that humidity starts coming out, it kind of softens these and rounds them out, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, awesome. So I think to best contextualize this in terms of the new release that's coming out, we probably should move on and try to get a couple of other things into the discussion. So Wine Club feels like the next best step for us to take here.
Yep.
So Wine Club first meeting, fun story for this one. I think this is one of the first times I received a sample in the mail where the bottle was just like crushed. Like the box was crushed, the bottle was open, and the box was just completely wet on one side. All of the sample had fallen out.
Oh no.
Let's see. I saved the bottle, but it's like hard for me to reach it right now.
Yeah, whatever.
But it's the same thing, right? Tiny bottle with basically a mini version of the official label on it. And it was just heartbreaking because there was like 2 drops left in there that I could actually taste. So I had my 2 drops of it and I said, man, it's a shame that I don't have enough of a sample to actually review this thing. Could you send me another one? So now we have another one. And Phil just got his, I think, from me a couple of days ago. So I don't know if he's had a chance to form thoughts on it. But for me, this is just like, This is one of the most beautiful wine cask finish whiskeys that I've ever had.
Oh wow, that means a lot coming from you. No, I really appreciate it, and just to kind of dive into what it is. Like I keep mentioning, these special releases in our Quintessential program, these are all about taking these fun cask finish single malts and then blending them together to create something unique that really hasn't been done before. And so the reason why it's named Wine Club, we always give it kind of a cheeky name. The reason why this name is named Wine Club is because it's a bunch of kind of exotic wine casks that we utilize for the process. So we used Amontillado sherry, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a second because I've got a thing for Amontillado sherry, obviously. Then Tokai, Muscatel, and then it was blended with peated malt finished in Pinot Noir casks. So obviously a bunch of very interesting wine casks utilized to create something that just I haven't really seen out on the market yet. And that's usually what I'm going for when it comes to these special release quintessentials.
You know what's so funny about that for me? As you were going through that, I was like, yeah, this mini label doesn't have any of that, doesn't have any of the description of what it is. And I try to spoil myself as little as possible on reviews before I have a chance to talk about it with the producer, before I have a chance to really taste it and do tasting notes. So I hadn't looked up the actual casking of this one yet. But as you were going through that list, I was like, yep, I love that. Yep, I love that. Yep, I love that. Yep, as it makes sense that this thing is beautiful to me because all four things that you said, the Amontillado, the peat, the sherry, and what was it?
Tokai, Muscatel, and then
right.
Malt and Pinot Noir. Yep,
that's right. So I haven't had a Muscatel single cask from you, but the Tokai, I love Tokai finished single malts. And they're more common in the US that I've seen so far, less in Scotch, which is, it's funny to me. It's cool. Like Scotch is stuck on Sauterne, I think. Tokai is a little bit of a trend, and I think the reason that American distilleries are coming out with it sooner than Scotch is just because American single malts tend to be younger.
Yeah,
basically have less time on them.
In that case, when it comes to so I talk about this a lot. When it comes to innovation, we actually have a major advantage on Scotland. Now, Scotland, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge Scotch geek. I love Scotch, so I would never make any implication that America's got it going on and they don't, or anything like that. But one thing that Scotch has that we don't is they have a lot of age, right? They've got a bunch of 20, 25-year-old single malts. That's not really possible in the United States because we're a much younger industry. But because we're younger, we have the advantage of having a head start on innovation. We're trying a lot of unique things to differentiate from Scotch, and that kind of gives us a head start. If they need their Tokai to be 20 years and we only need ours to be 7, well, that there are pros and cons to that is what I'm saying. So a lot of innovations coming out of what American Single Malt's putting out there right now. And I think over time, American Single Malt and Scotch are going to really benefit from one another. Innovation plus tradition are going to create something great.
So obviously both of these whiskeys we've just talked about are fairly complex, lots of different types of casks that we're talking about here. Several different types of malt, the peated and the unpeated. Which actually, let's talk about the malt for a second. Do I remember correctly that you bring in the malt from Scotland, or do I have my information mixed up?
No, you're partially correct. So we bring in malt from 2 different places. Our standard malt all comes from Prairie Malt Facility out of Saskatchewan, and then our peated malt does come from Scotland. Yeah, we use Baird's heavily peated malt.
Okay, so yep, the Baird's heavily peated malt. So lots of peated malt in the United States is coming from Baird's, which is, if I'm not mistaken, that's a Highland, Scotland peating facility.
Yep.
As opposed to Port Ellen Maltings, which is the one on Isla that supplies most of Diageo. Ardbeg is Diageo, right? Lagavulin for sure. Kalila. Oh yeah, sorry, Ardbeg is not Diageo, but Kalila, Lagavulin, these types of Lafroig as well, I believe.
Talisker,
no, not Lafroig. Talisker, that's the one.
Yep.
Yeah, so the Diageo, man, I need to brush up on my Scotch. I've been thinking about American Single Malt too long. You can recognize a Diageo bottle though, because they all have the same bottle shape and the same smoky glass and the same stopper.
Yep. That's exactly how I knew Talisker. Right. I was like, it looks identical.
Right,
yep.
Right. The tan stopper and the composite cork. Yep, it's really easy to tell that it's a Diageo bottling. Yep. So anyway, they're not really supplying malt to anyone outside of their portfolio anymore. So Baird's is really supplying the peated malt to everybody else in the world that is getting Scottish peated malt. So okay, that's cool. Saskatchewan. So I don't want I don't want to get political or anything, but tariffs are a thing now.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the future of Cedar Ridge getting your malts from Canada?
Yeah, long story short, I mean, we really don't know, which is one of the bigger problems with these tariff wars that are going on right now, is that if we were just a business making widgets today that we can sell tomorrow, it'd be a lot easier to navigate through it, because it's like, well, we've got a big problem and we need to deal with it right now. Well, it's a lot harder when they may or may not happen, and we're creating a product that we're going to sell 7 to 10 years from now. It gets really hard to plan around that and forecast it out. So there's a lot of uncertainty, not only for us, but for distilleries throughout the U.S. and the world, for that matter. But we can say that we've been in touch with our maltster, Prairie Malt, fairly regularly. They're communicating a lot with us, which is all we can ask for. And I'm honestly fairly confident that things will settle out and we'll be fine on this front. We are very fortunate we always do an annual contract with them, and we got ours in at the very beginning of the year. So we are at least set for this year when it comes to grain supply, and we have a few months here to figure out what we're going to do next year. I can't imagine working with anyone else, and I think all this will kind of shake itself out and settle out. But I can't imagine working with anyone other than Prairie Malt. They just create such a good malt that we've learned how to work with so well. It just when you're making whiskey, you've got all these different inputs that can affect flavor profile, and you kind of figure out how to work with them over time. And obviously the grain that you're utilizing, the malt that you're utilizing, is a huge one. And we've just gotten so good at working with what they're creating that it would be very difficult for us to make any changes on that front.
All right. So a quick follow-up on, so you mentioned a few months of grain. Obviously, dry grain keeps reasonably well for a certain amount of time. But fresh in my mind, of course, is we just went to ACSA. The American single malt rules got ratified. Lots of American single malts come out and get some celebration. And not to name names, but there are a few American single malts that do have a little bit of I don't want to say, like, to say faults is a little bit too strong. I think that some of it is a matter of opinion. But some of them have a very strong grain husky character, or even a little bit of stale grain character to them. And I wonder if you could speak as a master distiller in general terms about maybe where those types of flavor profiles come from.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that can lead to that, and it can be difficult to answer that question because everyone's doing their own thing, and I can't always speak to exactly what they're doing. I can speak on one subject in particular that applies to us very well too, and that's when you're a distillery, whether you're craft or independent or whatever you want to call us all, when you're a distillery, usually you're only well funded enough to buy one type of equipment. And the thing is a lot of distilleries want to make multiple types of whiskey, right? Like, for instance, at Cedar Ridge, we make bourbon, we make single malt, we make rye. There are some now, like Westland, for instance, they're heads down on single malt, and that's awesome because they can kind of stay consistent. Well, distilleries like us that make multiple types of whiskey, they have to have one setup. And so we, in particular, we produce everything like a single malt. Even our bourbon, like the people in Kentucky would hate our style of bourbon production because it's not technically lagered anymore because we use a mash filtration system, but we do an off-grain fermentation and distillation when it comes to our bourbon, which is wildly uncommon, very common in single malt. Well, now, so there's going to be a lot of other distilleries that are going to do it the exact opposite. They're going to produce their single malt like a bourbon, where they do an on-grain fermentation and distillation, and that's going to be more grain exposure, which is going to modify the flavor profile a little bit. There are other things, for instance, continuous column stills. Now, I know some people who are starting to make really good progress on producing single malt on continuous columns. I don't once again want to name any names there, but we're entirely a pot still setup. So we're fortunate in the sense that we've always been producing bourbon like we want to produce single malt, and so it was very easy for us to kind of plug and play our single malt production. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I think there are a lot of distilleries out there who have what they have when it comes to equipment, and it kind of creates certain constraints for them to operate within. And so at times that can create a little bit of a funky character in their single malt or in their bourbon, vice versa. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to contribute at least to your question, if that helps answer it.
Yeah, it's tough to like. I'd love to. Obviously, I'm not going to name names, right? And then it's like I'm prompting you in vague terms and hoping that you catch what I'm putting down. It's a topic that I think comes up for a lot of people who are exploring American single malt for the first time, where if you walk into a store, and thankfully there is in a lot of stores now, there's a growing section, at least in Total Wine, that is, they still put it under American whiskey, but there's still a dedicated section of the shelf that is clearly the American single malt section. And I feel if you were to randomly pick out a single malt from that shelf, chances are good it's going to be a really high quality single malt. It's going to be worth the money. But about 25% of the time, if you get something you've never heard of, you're going to kind of wonder, hey, what's the deal? Why, like, this doesn't taste at all like Scotch. This doesn't taste at all like bourbon. This is nothing about this is familiar to me. How can I contextualize this as part of a category? And some of that comes down to maybe arguably faults, maybe just a difference of opinion, maybe that they're using column stills instead of pot stills. I know of a few column still single malts that are pretty good, and a few column still single malts that I'm like, why did you go through all that work to make a single malt, all that expense to make it? And I'm gonna this is one I feel okay making fun of. Jack Daniel's makes single malt.
Yep.
They've been making single malt for a while because they have bonded single malt. And they've gone on record saying that they think single malt is a grain that needs some help. And I take exception to that, because I think single malt is a grain that you have to, if anything, it's a grain that speaks plenty well on its own, that you have to take extra steps to mute it, right? And obviously Jack Daniel's is doing their column still process with the maple charcoal filtration, and it's like, well, yeah, you just filtered all the flavor out of your single malt, so it makes sense that now you have to put it in a sherry cask to make it taste like Scotch, which is kind of what that's the style that they're going for. All that makes sense. These are differences of opinion. And end of the day, I don't think that's a bad product. In fact, I think it comes out tasting a fair amount like something like a Glenfarclas. It's actually a pretty decent single malt at the end of the day. But how they got there, the steps that they took to get there, it's like, well, you could have just skipped the maple charcoal filtration and done it on a pot still, and you could have had a very different type of product. It makes sense why that doesn't fit in their portfolio, but you catch what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, and that I think we're kind of on the same page. I mean, that comes down to them always having done their other whiskeys a certain way. They're going to make this whiskey that way too. And there are pros and cons that are going to come out of that. I mean, that's how innovation works, and how, I mean, they someone like that might end up stumbling into the next big thing, and all of a sudden Scotland's like, wow, well, look what they just discovered. Let's follow suit. So who knows what's going to come out of all this, but on the negative side of it, there are pros and cons. And on the negative side, I mean, the ones that come across as overly flawed, whether it's a difference opinion or not, I mean, they'll probably eventually fizzle out. Like any other industry. I mean, a bunch of products rush the shelf when something's new, and the good ones rise and stay, and the ones that are flawed or less than average, they have a tendency to go away. And we're starting to see that in bourbon right now. We went from having 40 bourbon producers to having like 3,000 bourbon producers, and we're getting to the point where that's not sustainable, and we're starting to see that number go back down. American single malt will eventually follow that trend as well. And right now, everyone's kind of rushing the market because it's something new. The TTB just started recognizing it. Eventually, good ones will stay and flawed ones will go away, and that's just how it works anywhere. So, which ones remains to be seen. But I think that it's cool that there is such a variety out there, and consumers are able to go out and they're kind of the deciders, right? What you do with your dollar is going to determine what the market looks like and what flavor profiles look like 10, 20 years from now. So it's exciting times on that front.
I realize that I've taken us off on a tangent a few steps away from where we started.
I have a tendency to do
about
that
the
too,
grain, and then getting into all these different methods of production. So since we have the Portside and the wine club first meeting in the glass to talk about, but we don't have a sample of your new product that's coming out. I wonder if you could just walk us through with these wine cask releases that we're drinking right now as context. Tell us a bit about that new release that's coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, and I apologize that we weren't able to get you a bottle. We literally bottled it yesterday, so
Totally understandable. And this interview that we've had scheduled here has been on the books for about 3 months, and we've had to keep moving it because of various schedule conflicts. So we were here to talk about, the peated Amontillado, and everything else that happened was incidental. So no worries at all. But let's give you the platform to promote your new product now, since
I very much appreciate that. So this is our 5th ever Quintessential special release. The way that we do this now is we release 2 per year, and we're not planning to increase that. We're not going to change it to 3. It's going to be 1 in the first half of the year, 1 in the second half of the year. So this is the first one of 2025, and so Quintessential, it is named after my family. Our last name is Quint, so that kind of tells you a little bit about the history of the Quintessential. Because of that, the number 5 within our company has always been something that's celebrated, because Quint literally means 5. And so we have a few different products, mainly on the wine side, that we celebrate that in. We have a wine called 5 Seasons. We have our Madeira wine that we talked about earlier. It's people started calling it V, but it was originally actually called 5, just with a Roman numeral, and everyone saw that and started calling it V. So we've had this theme for 5, and when we factored that in, and we were getting ready to come out with our 5th ever Quintessential, we thought it'd be fitting to just call this number 5. So that's what this one is called. It is our special release number 5, and this one has some kinks and quirks in it. I talked a little bit about Amontillado sherry, and we're going to continue talking about Amontillado sherry. I'm obsessed with the stuff. Single malt finish in Amontillado is basically where I hang my hat. That's kind of my staple. But in this one, I wanted to kind of take the safety blanket away, get rid of the pacifier, and not use Amontillado sherry in a special release. And so this one does not have it. So this one, I'll literally just read you what we've got on the label. But I was really proud of this. 2-row pale malted barley aged in ex-bourbon barrels. We almost always start out in ex-bourbon barrels. And the finishing casks involved in this are Ruby Port and Marquette red wine casks, blended with peated malt finished in Madeira casks. So one quick question that people are immediately going to have is, what the heck is Marquette? Well, Marquette is a grape varietal that we grow here in Swisher, Iowa. It can withstand our harsh Midwestern winters. So it's a fairly popular grape in the Midwest and places like upstate New York, even, I believe. So this Marquette red wine, it actually makes really good finishing casks for single malt. And I wanted to get that in the mix with what I would consider to be 2 elite finishing casks for standard single malt, whether it's in America or in Scotland. That would be Madeira and Port. So those are the 3. It is technically 5 different casks. Ruby Port, American Port from our winery, Madeira, American Madeira from our winery, and then this Marquette red wine. So it was really fun to put together. No Amontillado sherry listed once again. That's kind of exciting, and yeah, I'm really excited to see what people think of it. It is going to come out in about 72 hours, and we'll see if this one gets the same success and the same respect that the other ones got. So it's fun note on that. I always go on vacation when we release these. They take forever to produce. I've literally been blending this one since January, and I finally get out, finally kind of get out from under it once they get released. And I always go on vacation and kind of put my phone down for a few days just so I can not think about it. And I'm very excited to do that. I go on vacation on Friday.
Awesome. I know without even having tasted that product yet that you've earned it, because everyone that you've done before that has been fantastic as well.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, let's see. Now I know. Okay, so peat and sherry was the first one, is the only one I've never tasted, actually, as it turns out.
Yeah, and so I will make sure you get that. I don't want to take us off on a tangent. I just real quick, I want to go over a few things. There have been 5 ever. The first one ever was peat and sherry married. It was this was not supposed to be like this huge thing. The Quintessential special release is now like what Cedar Ridge is known for. At least nationally. In Iowa, we're known for bourbon, but nationally, it's more the special release because these have gone crazy on social media. The peat and sherry married, most people don't know about, because that was before all this really went crazy. And the whole concept there was I had this really, really good Amontillado sherry finished single malt, and I had a barrel of our peated malt single malt that I really loved, and I wanted to marry the 2 of them together. And it's spelled like the names. The original concept was we're going to create like a front label that almost looked like a wedding invitation. Pete getting married with Sherry, and that was kind of the whole concept. So it also started like the trend of us using kind of quirky names. So Peat and Cherry Married was the first ever special release. Then it was Portside. Then it was the Untitled Cigar Malt Project. Then Wine Club. And now number 5. So that is the history of how this is all unfolded. And it all started with that Peat and Cherry just kind of on a whim. It wasn't a forecasted or planned thing that we wanted to do. We just released 100 cases of something, and it ended up catching fire.
On the note of, locally being known for your bourbon and more nationally being more recognized nationally for these special releases, do you ever feel a little bit like sort of things have gotten sort of, cart before the horse on your more national brand recognition?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it took us a while to figure this out. We're known as very different things in different areas. Even in Iowa, people who have known us since 2005, they think of Cedar Ridge as a vineyard. People have known us since 2010, think of us as a winery. People have known us since, say, 2018. They know us as a distillery. So there's that. But then also in markets that we distribute to, in Iowa, we're mainly a bourbon distillery. Unless you're like in a single malt society, then you definitely know our quintessentials. Outside of Iowa, what's really interesting is our 86 proof bourbon, which is that number 1 seller in the state of Iowa. It beats Jim Beam and Maker's Mark here. Outside of Iowa, the 86 proof bourbon, we don't sell a lot of it. And the reason being because people who explore new distilleries in, say, like South Carolina and Louisiana and Texas, they're not usually exploring new distilleries at 86 proof. They're usually starting higher up. So they're more likely to buy our barrel proof bourbon or our port cask finished rye or our quintessential. And then, you get into social media, and what those people are interested in is almost entirely our quintessential line, whether it's the special releases or single casks. So it to your point, it has been a little confusing. And at first we didn't know how to navigate it. It's like, we're known for 86 proof bourbon. And so we're going to go to Texas and try to sell it there. Well, why isn't this working? And, it took us a second to kind of adjust it and realize, oh, hey, the market is changing so fast. And as we're expanding our distribution reach, we have to factor that in. So we need to focus on certain products and product lines in other markets than what we're doing in our home state and what has always worked here. So it's been really fascinating. It's not traditionally how it works in most product distribution. This is really unique because the market is changing and evolving so rapidly right now that it's just people know us as different things in different areas. And over time, that will absolutely settle out. But right now, it's just kind of chaotic.
I will say that when I hear Cedar Ridge, the two things that come to mind, somewhat strangely, are the wine finish quintessentials and the Iowa 9, but that's only because my older brother is a huge Slipknot fan.
Yeah, and so that once again, that's something that kind of did the exact same thing. People started learning about Cedar Ridge because of our collaboration with the band Slipknot. And that was a really unique point in our distillery's history. That was in, I think, 2018, 2019, when we started working with Slipknot. And back then, we were really, really Iowa focused. And so that was an opportunity for someone in the state of, Maine or Connecticut to hear about Cedar Ridge through the band Slipknot and this collaboration whiskey that we did. It was also fairly early in the celebrity whiskey game, which right now there's a lot of celebrity whiskeys out there. Back then, that wasn't really the case. So, it's weird. Everything we've done, like every segment is like this new chapter, and new fans come on board at different parts of this book. And so because of that, they know us as a distillery that does different things. There are people in certain states. Here's a really good one that I haven't talked a lot about, and I don't want to take us too far off track, but in the state of California at one point, a bunch of our rye whiskey got dumped into the state of California on a huge discount. And because of that, it ended up being $10 per bottle in the state of California, specifically at Trader Joe's.
Whoa.
Well, it was this crazy weird thing, and we had no control over it. And it was, at the time, it was really weird, and we didn't know how it was going to pan out. But because of it, a ton of people in California learned about Cedar Ridge through rye because it was such a good deal. They couldn't turn it down and they bought it and they really liked it. And then to people in California, it's like, yeah, there's this really good rye distillery in the state of Iowa called Cedar Ridge. And at the end of the day, that couldn't really be further from the truth. I mean, like 70%. Yeah.
This is the first time we've talked about rye today.
I know.
Out of everything in the portfolio.
We make rye like 4 times per year. You know, like we're not cranking out a ton of rye, just a few hundred barrels of it a year. But in California, a lot of people know us for rye specifically because of this deal. So that's just how it goes. It's like in this market, it's evolving so quickly, and so many more people are getting into whiskey that like whenever they get introduced to it, that's what they know you as. And so yeah, there's Slipknot, there's rye, there's Quintessential. We're kind of all over the map right now.
So we officially, I think we have about 10 minutes left with you before you've got to run for the tour that you got to give. So I'm gonna try to be tight on that. Since you did send us the Wine Club first meeting sample, I'd love for us to do some tasting notes on that briefly.
Let's do it.
And then also let's talk about the cigar malt, because I wonder how fast we can get through 3 samples in terms of tasting notes. I think I've said a few things already, so I'll give Phil a chance. What do you think of the Wine Club first meeting?
I really like it. It opens up with this really big, bold, bright, fruity note that sort of sits over top of a nice floral and vegetal note. And there's just a hint of like vanilla and caramel buried in the core of the flavor. But it really does lead off very nicely with the like bright fruits and floral notes that you expect from a variety of wines. And it is a lot in terms of like on the nose and on the palate and how much is there, and it takes a few moments of sitting with it and sort of dissecting it to really get to that nice warm quintessential core that you can go from the flagship to this and find that nice through line, but it's got all of these layers of bright fruit and vegetal notes to peel away to get there.
Well said.
Yeah, I think so. I'll pat my own back a little bit. In round 1 of season 2 of the Blind Sample Showdown on Freedom Malt's channel, I 100% pegged Cedar Ridge on one of the blind samples immediately based on the core distillery profile. And I thought, I'm based on my, I would say, limited experience tasting, because I've only had 6, I think, examples, including that one of Cedar Ridge. Yeah, including what's on my desk. So I thought it was the Tokai cask finish, and it was actually very close. It was the Sauterne cask finish. So like, you know, the same type of fortified wine with the noble rot botrytis cask finished Cedar Ridge. And I think the combination of the Cedar Ridge core profile and that botrytis wine flavor profile combination, I was 100% sure I know exactly what this is. And I was off by just the slightest amount. Just a slightly different wine cask is all that was.
That's impressive.
And thank you. I mean, there's a little bit of, I've tasted a few hundred things, but I think a little bit of just really what I want to comment on is that Cedar Ridge has such an identifiable, unique core flavor profile. Does not remind me in particular of any Scotch or any other American single malt. It is wholly unique. And most of the time when I say that, it's because there's something funky about it. Like there's something like you always know an Octomore or Bruichladdich because it has that lactic funk to it, right? Something that you wouldn't necessarily want in another whiskey, but something about Cedar Ridge just always has this core profile that is really, really nice and unique. And I think all of the whiskeys have that in common. It's not just necessarily that particular type of dessert wine. So why do I mention that? Aside from, first of all, I can recommend any Cedar Ridge on that basis. They all have this core profile that is in and of itself a delicious thing. So people should absolutely go out and buy any Cedar Ridge at all. You'll be happy. That's my takeaway from this. And the other thing is that there's something about that core profile that plays extremely well with these floral notes that we're getting here, which is one of the reasons that I say this is one of the most unique, one of the most beautiful wine finished whiskeys I've ever had. everything about the whiskey plays so perfectly together. Match made in heaven.
Hey,
And I think it's really unfortunate. I mean, I can't say this is unfortunate really, because the cigar malt blew up and was so well received, but almost how well that did seems to have eclipsed a little bit the Wine Club release. I haven't seen nearly as much conversation about it, and I think maybe it's that I follow. Bourbon Instagram is full of bourbon influencers, so maybe that's it. Maybe it's just the bias of my following, or the people that I follow.
In some respect, you're right about that. I mean, it still went pretty crazy, but you're right in the sense that the Untitled Cigar Malt Project, it did really well with bourbon people, and I think that's entirely because of the name. Believe it or not, bourbon people, cigar malts were really hot in bourbon for a while, or like cigar batch or whatever, and that's ironic because that's not what I wasn't trying to do that at all. I was actually trying to create a single malt that delivers a very similar experience to when you smoke a cigar, like big, bold up front, heavy tobacco, and then a finish that just lingers forever. The way that I've always said that is, when I smoke a cigar, I can still taste it in my mouth the next morning. I wanted to create a single malt that you could still taste like 10 minutes from now. And so that's what I was going for. But because the term cigar was on there, a lot of bourbon people who had traditionally not been willing to try American single malts, they gave it a go because they had like cigar batch bourbon. And so it kind of created a nice bridge for them to try it. And then a lot of them ended up liking it. And because of that, it just kind of went bananas. So it covered both like bourbon Instagram and single malt Instagram and Reddit and all that stuff. And it just really took off. Wine Club, it's a little bit more single malt and obviously geared towards the wine connoisseur as opposed to the bourbon. So I think that was one reason why it didn't get maybe quite the craze. It's still, believe it or not, Wine Club actually, we released 100 cases more of that than the Untitled Cigar Malt Project, and it actually sold out much faster. So I think that is because the success of these previous releases has caused kind of a momentum, or like something that's building at least. And it'll be interesting to see how number 5 does when it gets released in just a couple days. We once again did a slightly bigger batch on this because we want less people to miss out. But who knows if it'll stay on the same trajectory. It's always fun to see.
Yeah, maybe it could just be influencer selection bias a little bit, right? Yeah. The influencers did their job on the cigar malt, so wine club sold out quickly among people who aren't posting about it online necessarily. So that's great. It's awesome to hear. As long as we're talking about cigar malt, and we know that we're a little bit short on time, I'm just going to give a few tasting notes real quick on the cigar malt. As I mentioned, I feel like this one has more peat in it than the one that touts peat, the peated malt and Amontillado sherry. Leans more into the Amontillado, perhaps. The cigar malt is definitely a bourbon drinker's profile. I don't know that a Scotch fan who's interested in American single malt would necessarily resonate with the cigar malt on average, but I have the benefit that I was originally a bourbon drinker and then moved into Scotch and then American single malt. So I can see where this is coming from. And it is heavy on those oaky caramel sort of notes, and the leather tobacco definitely in there. But also that smokiness that gives you that impression of puffing on a cigar is really, really nice here. And even though on its face, cigar malt has a ton of complexity to it, it's most of the time easier drinking. It's deep and intense, but it's also mellow. Everything is kind of just a smooth, cohesive profile. It's one of those whiskeys you have to work really hard to pull individual tasting notes out of because it's so integrated, which I think that's a good thing. It makes my life hard as a reviewer, but I think as an end consumer, people really want a whiskey that feels connected from beginning to end.
And so I'm glad you got that, and I won't go too far down the rabbit hole on that. But one thing I'm really always going for is integration. I'm always trying to build a whiskey that kind of follows like the general outline of a story. You're establishing your plot. You've got rising action to a climax, falling action, a conclusion. And when it came to the Cigar Malt Project, out of everything I've blended before, even though I'm always trying to do this, that cigar malt project kind of hit the mark the most on that. It was the most integrated, and it really develops that plot. That smoke starts to really shine, and then it kind of takes off, and then you get a nice conclusion at the end there. So that one, when it came to the blending of that might be the most proud of an actual integrated blend that I've ever been. I'm not necessarily saying that that's my favorite one I've released, but the process behind it, I was really, really happy with how it came together.
And now, just because we got about 3 minutes left, I want to go right on into that Amontillado release. And I'm just going to say that coming right off, so I love trying these things all in different orders. And today, this is an order I haven't tried yet, because I've always done the Wine Club and the Amontillado, because I got them at the same time, and I always pair them side by side, getting ready for this interview. But today, I had the cigar malt right before the Amontillado. And the unique tasting note that I'm getting today that I've never gotten before is Werther's Original on the nose.
Nice.
So it's got that nice hard candy butterscotch.
See,
I like that.
I've found that it is surprisingly phenolic. Something about the Amontillado sherry brings out like a phenolic rubbery note in the peat that I really enjoy, and it gives it this really interesting, the way it plays off of the sort of old fruit note of the Amontillado sherry, that like dry, almost bittersweet note that just it integrates really well and creates a unique flavor profile, I think, in American single malt.
Yeah, this is, I want to say I've had things similar to this in Scotch, especially if we're talking about Highland Park, but more intense, or like something like along the lines of Port Charlotte with a little bit less smoke in it. Because these are known for being wine cask and also mellow.
Yeah.
I always compare Cedar Ridge more to Scotch than I do to most other American single malts, or most other American single malts I'm not necessarily comparing to Scotch. But Cedar Ridge, if I didn't know what it was, like if it blinded, right, when I could, like, that's 100% I know that's Cedar Ridge. If I didn't know that, I would say this feels like something like an Islands Scotch whiskey. But just more intense somehow, right? There's a depth of flavor to it. I agree with you, Phil. While I stand by, I think this is less smoky than the cigar malt. I do think it's more phenolic. It has more of that peat, earthy character to it. I think accentuated by that dry sherry. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. I don't have that one in front of me right now. I think just revisiting from memory, one thing I really liked about it was I got a lot of like brininess with it, kind of a salt element. And I think that with the sweetness from that Amontillado sherry cask, I think that did offset a little bit of the smoke, but not entirely cover it up. So I think that's why you get like one side of it, but it's not necessarily overwhelming. And the last thing I'll say about it is that I always put so much time into our special releases, the blends. They take forever. I have a love-hate relationship with the Amontillado, the peat malt Amontillado, because I think that might be the best thing we've ever released. And it was a single cask. I didn't spend any time blending it or anything. It just kind of did its own thing, and it ended up going really well. So because of that, I'm always a little bit bitter towards it. But I do think that it is probably the best thing we've ever put out. And I agree, it is the most Scotch-like release we've ever done. And we do have a tendency to be on the Scotch-like side in general. So that's really saying something. The American single malts, I would agree, we tend to be most along the side of Scotland, and that is very much intentional. That was always our vision.
Well, all right. With that, we are at time, so I'm not going to belabor our sign off today with any of our usual bits. I'm going to let Murphy get back to his work day. Murph, it's been great to have you on to get geeky about the production methods and to talk about probably the most whiskeys we've talked about on this podcast in over a year, and yet in the shortest time we've ever done it. So
rapid fire.
I think the rapid fire, it speaks to the quality of all these whiskeys that we don't have to work very hard to find what's great about them. Not that necessarily, I don't want to say, hey, look at all those other podcasts that we've done and we had to work hard at those, but I think we're getting better at it. But definitely Cedar Ridge makes it easy.
Look, drinking whiskey is always hard work.
It is. Remember, guys, don't do this because this is a job. And I mean that both. That's like the lol sob. That's like I mean that as a joke and also in genuine seriousness. Putting out a podcast is work, but again, I'm not going to belabor that point either. We do need to let Murphy get back to his day. Murph, thanks so much for coming back on and giving us an update. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, just thanks so much for having me. I hope to do this again with you guys several times. And in addition to that, thanks for all you guys do for American single malt in general. It's such an exciting category, and you guys bringing awareness to not only what we're doing, but what other American single malt distillers are doing in our country. It's very helpful. So thanks for all you guys do.
Yeah, and thanks for everything you do, because the category wouldn't exist without great producers like you. So to leading the charge. Until next time, we'll see you in the lodge. Cheers.
Slancha.